Welcome to another explainer. Let's just dive right in. When you picture ancient Buddhist monks, what comes to mind? Probably serene, quiet people meditating in pristine mountain caves, totally detached from the messy realities of daily life, right? Well, today we are cracking open a 2,000-year-old legal casebook that completely shatters that peaceful illusion. Because behind the scenes, the ancient monastic world was gritty, incredibly complex, and absolutely packed with bizarre, everyday conflicts.
To understand just how wild this gets, I want you to put on your judge's robe for a second. Imagine you're a monk wandering through a deep forest and you stumble upon a deer that's been half-eaten by a tiger. You are starving. If you take that leftover meat, have you just committed a crime? Are you literally stealing from the tiger? How would you rule?
Well, according to the ancient text we're exploring today, the answer is yes, you are a thief. Why? Because the ruling states that tigers return for their prey. They haven't abandoned it. But, and here's a brilliant little loophole, if you take the leftovers of a lion, it is perfectly legal. Why? Because lions don't return to their kills. This perfectly illustrates that these ancient monks weren't just sitting around pondering abstract spiritual concepts, they were dealing with hardcore real-world survival issues.
Section 1. The Vinaya as Ancient Jurisprudence.
So, that brings us to what we're actually looking at today. We are exploring excerpts from an ancient text known as the Vinaya, specifically the 10 Recitations Vinaya. You see, the Vinaya wasn't just a list of polite suggestions for spiritual living. It was a massive, highly sophisticated legal framework. Think of it like a 2,000-year-old version of Law and Order. Monks would get into disputes or find themselves in weird ethical dilemmas, and they would bring these cases directly to the Buddha. The Buddha essentially acted as Chief Justice, hearing these cases and issuing rulings that built up a binding legal precedent.
Moving on to Section 2, Defining the Crime of Theft. Let's look at our first major category of case law to see how this all builds, focusing on the strict rules around theft. Remember, monks were supposed to own basically nothing. So figuring out what counted as stealing became incredibly detailed. Here's a fascinating Socratic dilemma from the text. Monks needed robes, right? And one common way to get them was to scavenge for rags in graveyards. So picture this. A monk takes clothes found near a freshly deceased corpse. Is he a thief?
Notice the incredible nuance of the Buddha's ruling here. The exact same physical action, just picking up a piece of cloth, can result in two totally different verdicts. If the monk truly believed the clothes were abandoned by the dead, there's no offense. But if he knew those clothes were left there temporarily by a graveyard caretaker or placed as a tax by grieving families, the punishment is parajika. That means complete expulsion from the monastic order. It's the absolute heaviest sentence possible. The law cared deeply about context.
The text is just full of these amazingly practical legal checklists. For example, two monks once got into a huge fight because one, quote-unquote, borrowed the other's robes to try them on, and the owner accused him of theft. To solve this, the court laid out the 5 conditions of taking with consent. Honestly, it reads like a modern legal contract. You can only take something if you know they are a reliable friend, you inform them, and you are absolutely certain they'll be happy about it. It's just highly practical everyday conflict resolution.
But it wasn't all dry checklists. Sometimes the Buddha used fables to set legal precedent. There's a great story in the text about an overly greedy monk who used legal loopholes to hoard alms from different monasteries. The Buddha scolded him using the parable of the jackal and the otters. It goes like this. 2 otters catch a fish, but just can't figure out how to split it. A jackal steps in, offering to be an expert judge. He gives the tail to one otter, the head to the other, and then casually walks off with the entire meaty middle of the fish as his quote-unquote legal fee. It's a hilarious, sharp critique of monks using the letter of the law to violate the spirit of the law.
Section 3. Magical Powers and Legal Exemptions.
Okay, let's shift gears to one of the most fascinating aspects of this text, how ancient law accounted for the supernatural. Because in the world of the Vinaya, magic was treated as a documented, factual reality. Imagine this scenario. Bandits enter a courtyard and attack some children to kidnap them. A monk named Yasa happens to be meditating nearby. He uses his magical powers to summon an illusionary, terrifying army of 4 types of troops. The bandits get terrified and run away, leaving the kids behind. But here's the crazy part. Other monks actually accused Yasa of a crime. They argued that by scaring the bandits, Yasa technically stole the children away from the bandits' possession. No way, right?
So the crucial point here is how the Buddha ruled. He decreed that using supernatural powers to save people from harm is absolutely not a crime.
Whether it was Monk Yasa saving kids, or another famous case where Monk Maud turned into a giant bird to save merchant ships from sea dragons, the court established a clear legal exemption. The production of innocent life completely overrides a strict literal interpretation of property law.
Moving to Section 4, Murder, Manslaughter, and Tragic Accidents.
That emphasis on life brings us to the heaviest and frankly most consequential part of the Vinaya. Let's look at how this ancient court handled cases involving the loss of human life. We actually have an ancient euthanasia case here. An injured man is impaled and crying in absolute agony in a ditch. A passing nun hears him. Driven entirely by compassion, she decides to give him a medicated sour drink, specifically hoping it will hasten his death so he can finally stop suffering. She does it, and he dies. Now, think about your own moral compass for a second. Is this a crime?
The ruling might actually surprise you. It was parajika, expulsion, the highest offense possible. The Buddha ruled that even though her motive was compassion, to end his suffering, the underlying intent of her action was to kill a human being. The deliberate intent to end a life was present, making it murder in the strict eyes of the monastic law.
Now compare that euthanasia case to a tragic construction accident detailed in the text. Some monks were building a bathhouse and hoisting a massive wooden beam. It slipped from their hands, fell, and tragically killed a carpenter below. The ruling for them? No offense. They were warned to be much more careful, but because the beam slipped purely due to physics, it was just too heavy, there was zero intent to harm. It's the exact difference between modern manslaughter and premeditated murder. The Buddha judged the physics of the accident strictly against the state of the monks' minds.
Finally, Section 5, the unifying philosophy of intent.
And that brings us to the absolute climax of this explainer. What ties the tiger meat, the graveyard clothes, the magical armies, and the falling beams all together? It all comes down to this single crucial quote. With what intent did you do this? If you read the source text, the Buddha asks this specific question over and over and over again. Every single time a monk is brought before him, before examining the physical evidence or the final outcome, he asks, what was in your mind? It is the ultimate measuring stick for karma and for law.
This brilliantly illustrates the concept we rely heavily on today, mens rea, or the guilty mind. It's the foundational principle of Western legal systems, the idea that an act alone doesn't make you guilty unless your mind was also guilty. What's absolutely staggering is seeing this exact, highly developed jurisprudence operating flawlessly in a 2,000-year-old Buddhist text. The physical action is almost secondary. The true crime is the corruption of the mind.
Which leaves us with something pretty deep to think about. We've spent this time judging ancient monks and their bizarre dilemmas. But if we apply that exact same standard, if the ancient court of karma focuses entirely on the mind rather than just the outcome, how pure is the intent behind your actions today? It's a heavy question for sure, and a really powerful lens to view our own daily choices through. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.